The Galactic Council had made their decision with the cold calculation of a species that had ruled the stars for millennia. One human would remain behind on the prison world of Xerion 7 as a gesture of good faith, while the rest of humanity was granted passage back to their isolated corner of the galaxy. The Council believed they were being merciful. After all, humans were barely more than primitives who had stumbled into space travel through crude chemical rockets and nuclear fusion. Commander Sarah Chen had volunteered without hesitation. As the senior officer of the diplomatic mission, she understood the weight of the sacrifice. Her crewmates had protested, but she'd silenced them with a look that had earned her command of 3 separate deep space missions. "Get home," she'd told them. "Tell them what happened here." The Xerion guards, towering insectoid creatures with compound eyes that reflected the harsh orange light of their sun, had watched with barely concealed amusement as the human transport departed. They understood sacrifice in the abstract. Their own species had evolved from hive-minded ancestors, but the concept of one individual choosing to suffer for others struck them as primitively emotional. What they didn't understand was humanity's capacity for memory, for vengeance, and for the kind of technological innovation that desperation could fuel. Commander Chen spent her first year in the crystalline mines of Xerion 7, her hands bleeding as she extracted the precious minerals that powered the Council's vast fleet. The work was backbreaking, designed to humble the prisoners and break their spirits. But Chen used the time to observe, to learn, and to plan. She studied the guard rotations, memorized the facility layouts, and most importantly, she began to understand the fundamental weakness in the Council's thinking. They saw humans as individuals, isolated and fragile. They couldn't comprehend that every human carried within them the collective memory and determination of their entire species. Meanwhile, 18 months after the diplomatic mission's return to Earth, the first of humanity's new ships began rolling out of orbital shipyards that had been expanded far beyond their original capacity. The technology they incorporated wasn't just human. It was a synthesis of every scrap of alien knowledge that humanity had managed to acquire, reverse engineer, and improve upon during their brief contact with galactic civilization. Dr. Elena Vasquez had led the engineering teams that cracked the secrets of faster-than-light travel, but not content with mere replication, she'd found ways to make human ships faster, more maneuverable, and infinitely more difficult to detect than anything the Council had ever encountered. Where alien ships relied on massive, predictable energy signatures, human vessels used a combination of exotic matter manipulation and quantum uncertainty that made them appear as little more than cosmic background radiation until it was far too late. Admiral Marcus Webb had overseen the construction of the fleet, but his true genius lay in understanding that humanity's greatest advantage wasn't their technology, it was their unpredictability. While every other species in the galaxy had evolved along similar paths, developing similar solutions to similar problems, humans had emerged from a world of incredible diversity and constant conflict. They thought in ways that no alien strategist could anticipate. The fleet that humanity assembled wasn't built according to galactic conventions. There were no massive dreadnoughts or standardized battle formations. Instead, they'd created thousands of smaller vessels, each one unique, each one capable of independent action while remaining part of a larger coordinated effort. It was less like a traditional navy and more like a swarm of technological locusts, each one carrying the accumulated fury of an entire planet. 2 years after Commander Chen had been abandoned, the first human ships appeared at the edges of Council space. They didn't announce themselves or demand negotiations. They simply began systematically dismantling every Council installation they encountered, not through brute force, but through precision strikes that left enemy vessels drifting, helplessly in space, their crews unharmed but their ships completely inoperable. The Council's response was swift and overwhelming, or so they believed. They dispatched their finest fleet, 300 ships strong, to crush this human insolence. What they found instead was empty space and the wreckage of their own frontier stations. By the time they realized they were fighting an enemy that refused to engage in conventional warfare, human forces had already penetrated deep into Council territory. The aliens found themselves fighting ghosts, ships that appeared from nowhere, struck with surgical precision, and vanished before any response could be mounted. But the humans weren't interested in conquest. They had come for one person. When the rescue fleet finally reached Zerion 7, Commander Chen had been expecting them. She'd spent the last 6 months organizing the other prisoners, representatives of dozens of species who had fallen afoul of the Council's rigid order, into a resistance network that had effectively taken control of the planet from the inside. The Zerion guards who had once laughed at human weakness found themselves facing something they'd never encountered before. An enemy that fought not just for victory, but for the principle that no one gets left behind. As Chen walked aboard the lead human vessel, she looked back at the planet that had been her prison and her classroom. Behind her, thousands of former prisoners from across the galaxy looked up at the human ships with something approaching reverence. They had witnessed firsthand what happened when you underestimated the species that had clawed its way up from a world where cooperation and individual sacrifice were the only things standing between survival and extinction. The Galactic Council eventually sued for peace, but on humanity's terms. The agreement they signed established a simple principle that would reshape galactic civilization. Never again would any sentient being be abandoned as a political gesture. Commander Chen had spent 2 years in hell, but she had taught the galaxy a lesson that would echo across the stars for generations. Humanity might forgive, but they never, ever forget. And when they come for their own, they don't come alone. They come with the fury of an entire species that refuses to accept that anyone is expendable. The fleet that returned Chen to Earth carried with it not just one rescued human, but the promise that wherever humans traveled in the galaxy, they would travel as one people, indivisible and unbreakable, bound together by the simple understanding that the strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack.